Hey everyone, it's Chris here, and in today's video I'm going to show you exactly how to set up Goo Motion Library. Now, before I'm going to dive into the full tutorial and show you a couple of animations that are possible with Goo, let me just take a moment and explain to you the reason behind this Goo Motion Library. So we always wanted to have an animation library based on different scroll triggers. The problem with the Webflow interaction engine is every single time you would create a new animation, and let's say you wanted to reuse it for other elements, you would usually create a global class. You would set up an interaction on that global class, and then you would apply this global class to literally every single element that you want to animate. Now, number one, this does create a bloated CSS file because you end up with the same styles, but the only difference being the trigger that animate that specific element. And the second point is the Webflow engine itself will add all of these Webflow animations inside the main webflow.js file, which again will have an impact on your page load. So with that being said, we wanted to have an animation library that is scroll based, but the second point is we also wanted to be integrated with GSAP, which stands for GreenSock Animation Platform. And finally, of course, we wanted to make sure that it does not rely on CSS classes, but rather on custom attributes that you would quickly set up, customize to your need, and publish your animation. So with this being said, what I do have on my screen is the clonable landing page. And just keep in mind that Goo is fully open source. You can click on this open source link. It will open up our GitHub repository. Right now, we don't have any README, but by the time maybe you're gonna check this tutorial in the future, you're gonna see a README file here with basically how to create new animations and how to clone this project for your very own needs. Now, if we go back to our landing page, you're also going to see a button that says full documentation and source. And if you click this button, it will take you to this Notion page, at least for now. And on this Notion page, you're going to see an about section in case you want to read about the full list of features, as well as the setup instructions. So before we're going to dive into the setup instructions and how all of these custom attributes work with Goo, let me actually show you a couple of examples. So if you're going to click on See Examples, it's going to take you to this section right here, where basically you're going to see how different Goo motions, they do work with different triggers. We're going to talk about the Goo types, i.e. the Goo triggers later on, but what you're going to see here is every single animation that comes with Goo Motion Library, and of course with different triggers. You can see that we have words stagger animation, we have letters stagger animations, and they're also called kinetic typography, as well as this standard animations like fade-ins, fade-ups, based on the scroll position, and of course, based on how many elements there is in a specific parent. This kind of animations works really good if you have, let's say, a collection list and you want to animate every single collection item in that list. So feel free to go through this entire page, have a look over all of these animations. Just keep in mind the default duration we set is about like 2 seconds. And that is because we want to make sure you do fully see the animation, even if it does take longer. The Goo Motion Library also comes with different triggers and with different actions. So let's say when an element leaves the viewport, it will reverse the animation by default. When it re-enters, it will play the animation again. And we're going to talk about all of these conditions later on. But just for now, make sure you just scroll all the way to the bottom, have a look over all the animations, especially the skew one, because this is one of my favorite, which skews the element based on your scroll velocity. And of course, we're going to cover it in the next part of this video. So with that being said, if you're going to have any questions around how Goo is working, or you're going to need help integrating Goo library, just send us an email or leave a comment under this YouTube video. So the second part, I just wanted to show exactly how to integrate and go through every single attribute that comes with the Goo Motion library. So inside this Notion page, you're going to have the very first step. And very first step, as usual, we need to load the core libraries that comes with Goo. So Goo relies on GSAP and also on the scroll trigger plugin that comes with the GSAP. So the very first step is to take all of these three scripts, so number 1, number 2, and number 3, and copy them over to the before the body closing tag inside your Webflow project settings. And you do so by clicking on copy here inside the Notion, and then you can go to your Webflow project settings and paste that in before the body closing tag. Now, if I would open up this clonable inside my Webflow designer, and if I would check the page settings, then what you're going to notice is at the very bottom where we have the before body closing tag, we have the Goo library enabled. If I'm going to toggle this line wrapping, you can see that indeed we have 3 scripts that we are loading up. We also have the tooltip library, and that is just an add-on that we've built for this demo. So when you hover over all of these attributes, it basically tells you exactly what it does. Now, if we go back to the Webflow designer, chances are some of the scripts might impact a little bit your site speed. So in that case, what you can do is you can just come right here and type the word defer, which is an attribute for the script tag, and that would defer your script, meaning these scripts, they will only load after the initial page has been fully loaded. So I hope this does make sense. So being said, that is the very first step. Quite straightforward. You just copy this 3 line of codes and you paste it inside your Webflow project settings before the body closing tag, of course. And now the second step is to add the attributes that makes Goo work. So the very first attribute, it's called Goo, which basically kind of initializes the entire animation. And the value of this custom attribute is any name of the animation. So all the animation names, they're available right here at the bottom where it says animation names. And we have a few animations. We have fade up, fade down, fade in, all the way to the skew. And again, if you want to see how all of these animations work, just go to this demo page, click on a specific animation, and then just scroll these elements inside your screen, inside your viewport, and then you're going to see exactly how each animation is working. So that is the very first attribute called Goo, right? And basically just apply this attribute to any element you want to be animated. If we go back to the Webflow product settings, to this clonable, let me click on this element right here called box. If I go to the settings, then you're going to see that the Goo attribute is definitely added, and the value is fade up, which is basically the name of the animation. So I hope this does make sense. Now let's continue to the very next attribute, and that is Goo type. So Goo type is one of my favorite, and which makes Goo really unique. So Goo type basically specifies the type of animation, or to better say, how that element needs to behave once it reaches the viewport. So Goo type comes with 5 different values. The very first one is standard, and the motion is triggered when an element enters the view. Now the second one is called scroll. This is one of my favorite, and the motion is triggered when element scrolls through view. It's almost identical to using the Webflow while scroll in view interaction. And to show you exactly how this is working, we have this nice fade up with the Goo type attribute set to scroll. And as I'm scrolling, you can see that we're playing this fade up animation. This works really great if you have, let's say, a banner and you want this banner to fade up while the user is scrolling this banner through the viewport. So I hope this does make sense too. Now, the very next type, it's called stagger, and basically the motion animates each element one by one. It works really great for collection list. And stagger, this is something that you'll have to apply to the parent element. So all the Goo attributes, if you're using stagger, needs to be applied to the parent. And let me show you exactly what I mean by that. So if we go back to the clonable, and if we do select, let's say, this one right here, and let's assume this is a collection list, you can see that this collection list has all of the Goo attributes applied. Why so? Because, well, it's easier for Goo to animate in a staggered motion all the rather than, independently adding the goo to every single element. It's just more scalable, you know? Plus, let's say you do have a collection list inside of Webflow, right? And you want to animate every single collection item. Use case of using Goo type stagger. And again, keep in mind that if you're using this kind of type, then you have to apply the Goo attributes to your collection list or to the parent of that list of elements you want to animate. All right, so that being said was stagger. The very last two sets of types is words and letters. And this will basically, you should apply this to your typography elements, whether it's a text block, paragraph, heading, really doesn't matter. Words will animate words one by one, while letters will animate letters and characters one by one. So a good example is if we head over back to this demo page, and we're looking over the fade up, then you're gonna see this one. We have the words, yeah, because the Goo type is set to words here. And then we have the letters, and you can see how nicely every single word or every single letter was animated. In motion design, this kind of motion, it's called kinetic typography, right? And if we go to the fade down, you can basically see the same idea. This time, whether the words or the letters, they're fading from down of the screen. So keep in mind that if you use Goo type words or letters, usually you need to apply this to your typography elements. And to basically show you how you would apply this, let me go back to the Webflow designer and let me select this one with the words. So you can see that this heading right here have Goo type set to words, while this one with letters has the Goo type set to letters. So I hope this Goo type letters and words make sense to you. Now, the very next one is Goo start and Goo end. And basically, the value of these two attributes is the same value that you would apply to GSAP start and GSAP end. We put here a really nice documentation for you to understand better how the GSAP start and GSAP end attribute is working, but it's just basically a revamp of these GSAP attributes. And we created here for you some possible values, and I wanted to take you back to my Figma and show you how to construct how this possible values are working. So Goo start defines when the animation should start. And again, it's listening to the scroll position, like how much that element entered or left the viewport. So for Goo start, we have top 50, we have top bottom, and we have top 80%. So let's start with this top 50% first. Now, if we go back to the Figma, I have a quick visualization here so you better understand. Now, the very first unit, which is this top here, can be whether top or it can be bottom. This defines the border, or to better say, the margin of the element. So if we go back to Figma, you can see that the top, it's obviously at the top of the element, while the bottom, it's at the bottom of element. And then the 50% or 20%, it basically dictates how much the top or the bottom of element reaches within this threshold. So if we go back, looking over these possible values, we have this top 50%, which means that the animation will start playing when this top part of the element, yeah, so let's move it down, when the top element will reaches this 50%. Yeah. If we go back and look at another example, let's say we have top 80%, go back to Figma. So let's say this is not 50, but it's 80. And since it's 80, obviously we need to move it to the bottom of the screen. So somewhere here, closer to 100. And then that would mean top 80% would mean that the animation will start playing when the top border, when the top margin of the element reaches the threshold of 80% within the screen. And obviously the very last set, top bottom, basically means when the element is fully visible. So I hope this does make sense. If not, guys, you can obviously open up the official GSAP scroll trigger documentation and have a look at different examples. All right, the very next one, it's Goo duration, and it's in the seconds. So the value, it's a number, and it represents the seconds, and it's just basically the duration of the animation. Just keep in mind that for scroll animation, this affects the speed, i.e. how the GSAP needs to smooth the entire speed, okay? So if you want to learn more, again, visit the official GSAP documentation. But being said, Goo duration affects the duration of the animation in seconds. Now the very next one, it's Goo easing, and this sets a specific easing. By default, it's set to power 1 out, and you have this link to the GSAP easing documentation. So if you click on this one, it will show you a really nice ease visualizer, and if you click on all of these easing options, basically GSAP will show exactly how that specific easing is working. So let's say you want to do a bouncing easing where the element bounce, right? You would click on this bounce, and then all you have to do is just copy this easing and apply it as a value for this Goo easing, right? So to show exactly how this is working, let's copy this Goo easing, attribute name, then we're gonna go back to the Webflow, and let's say that for this fade up, I wanna set a specific easing. And by default, again, it's set to power 1 out, but let's say you wanna have a bounce effect. You would type Goo easing here, and then for the value of this attribute, then you can just simply copy this element from here. So bounce.out, you go back, and where it says value, you just paste this bounce.out. You publish your changes, and now this specific element will have this custom easing option applied. So I hope this does make sense. Now the very next one is Goo stagger, and this is the duration of every single animated item in case you're using the stagger animation type. So what I mean by that is, let me go back to this quick demo. And we have this stagger animation. Yeah, every single element within a collection list or within a group of elements animate each by one. So if you want to control the animation or the duration of every single element, you would use Goo stagger attribute, and the value is just basically the seconds. You can see that in this demo that just played, the Goo stagger is set to 0.3 seconds, which means that every single element will roughly take 0.3 seconds. So keep in mind that the Goo stagger, it's again working with the Goo type set to stagger. So what I mean by that is, if you do remember, Goo type have 5 different types: standard, scroll, stagger, letters, and words. Now the Goo stagger attribute will only work for those animation types where the stagger feature is enabled within the GSAP. And by default, all the Goo motions, they have the stagger applied for the scroll type, for the stagger, and words and letters, okay? So keep that in mind. If you want to use Goo stagger, make sure you apply this to an animation type that indeed use the stagger feature. And to show you this better, in case you're a developer, you can always open this up from the GitHub. We have this animation.js where we basically store all of the animations. And if we're looking over the fade up, you can see that the stagger type, the words, and the letters indeed use the stagger feature. So we have a stagger here, we have another stagger here, and we use another stagger here. And the value of all of these staggers, they're basically being passed, or they're being grabbed from our Goo stagger attribute. So I hope this does make sense. All right, so the very next one is Goo disable, and Goo disable just disables animations or motions on a specific breakpoint. So let's say you want an animation to be enabled on the desktop, but you don't want an animation to be enabled on the mobile for, I don't know, for page speed performance consideration. So in that case, you would use Goo disable, and the value would be mobile. Goo disable comes with 2 options, mobile and tablet. Mobile disables the motions on the mobile landscapes, i.e. 767 pixels and below, while the tablet disables the motion on tablet and below, i.e. 991 pixels and below. Good. Now, the very last two set of attributes is Goo Animations and Goo Debug. So let's do the Goo Debug first because it's easier. Now, GSAP comes with markers. So if you want like to debug a specific animation, if you want to see when the element reaches a specific threshold of your screen or when it leaves the viewport, you can definitely use Goo Debug set to true, and that will enable the markers. And if we're looking over right here, obviously we don't have any of those enabled, but if you would enable, you would basically see right here on the right side of your screen, you're gonna see the GSAP debugging markers. So I hope this does make sense. All right, final one, which is the Goo Action. Now the Goo Actions attribute, it controls what the animation needs to do or what GSAP needs to do when the element leaves the viewport or when it re-enters back. Okay, so what GSAP needs to do with the animation. Should I like play the animation in reverse? Should I reset the animation? Should I normally play? Like what exactly wanted me to do? And you can see that the Goo Actions comes, or at least the value of these Goo Actions comes with 4 things. So we have plain, none, and reverse. So there's like 4 things, right? So the very first thing is on enter, and that is when the element enters the viewport. Second set is on leave, and that is when it leaves. Third one is on enter back, and the very last one is on leave back. And by default we have plain, none, and reverse, which basically means that when the element leaves the viewport, it will just reverse the animation, creating like a more smoother experience. And if you want me to explain all of these in details, please let me know in the comment section below. But just to explain you visually how all of these are working, so let me do like this for you guys. Let me copy this, let me go back to the Figma, and let me close actually this, and let me leave all of this percent at the right side, and let me put this here. Good. Right, I have all of the 4 options right here. So on enter means when it enters. Right, so let's say it's somewhere here outside of the viewport and then it enters. So that would be considered on enter event. The very next one is on leave, and that is when the element is leaving. So when you keep scrolling down and the element just leaves the viewport, right? So that would be on leave. Third one is on enter back, and that is when once it enters back. So let's say you scrolled, it left the viewport, it's somewhere here, but then you scroll back to the top and then it re-enters back. So that would be considered on enter back. And finally on leave back, when it's leaving back. So if you scroll back to the top, it will be something like this, and well, it's leaving the viewport back again. So that's why the default properties that we have here, it's play, none, and reverse, because let's say we have the fade up animation. When it enters, we want to play, right? But on leave back, so when it leaves back, we want to reverse the animation. So being said, I hope this does make sense to you guys. I know it's kind of a little bit challenging to understand all of these 4 properties, but with this visualization, with this concept, an example I just gave you, I hope you can understand better all of these 4 values. If not, you can go to the GSAP documentation and learn more.